The Constitutional Committee of the Peruvian Congress plans to resume debates on the proposal to bring forward the general elections by late 2023. Also, in the aftermath of the U.S. Silicon Valley Bank collapse, worldwide financial institutions feel its effects despite reassurances and downplaying statements from officials. And China's visa authorities abroad will resume issuance of all categories of visas to foreigners. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. And I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. And now we begin with the news. The Constitutional Committee of the Peruvian Congress plans to resume on Tuesday the debates on the proposal to bring forward the general elections to the end of 2023, which will limit the government of the appointed President Dina Boluarte to April 2024. The bid has already been rejected several times by the Peruvian legislature despite the political crisis and the popular claim for early polls after the ousting of President Pedro Castillo. According to official media close to the executive, the project suggests that the elections be held in December 2023 for the new Peruvian president to take office in April 2024 until 2028, matching a new legislative term. In spite of the popular pressure, the Boluarte government is reluctant to hand over the power, although the clamor of the people against it is growing every day. On Monday, a Mexican judge ordered the start of the oral trial against the former director of Petroleos Mexicanos, Pemex, Emilio Lozoya Austin, under prosecution for the corruption case of the construction company Odebrecht. Although the trial against the former Pemex executive is expected to take place in 5 days, it could be extended after Emilio Lozoya's defense filed an injunction to determine to which institution the damages should be repaired and thus suspend the proceedings against him. The Mexican Attorney General's office requested 46 years in prison for Lozoya. The former official faces criminal charges of criminal association, which accounts for 10 years and 300 days in prison, as well as bribery with 14 years in prison and 150 days, and illicit origin with 22 years in prison and 6 months. We stay in Mexico. There, a total of 354,000 fentanyl pills, known in the drug world as rainbows, were found in a pickup truck bound for the United States. According to the Attorney General's office, the shipment was found hidden in the vehicle's engine during a search in Ahumí, Sinaloa, amid investigations on the trafficking of this narcotic. Along with the pills, they also found 2.7 kilos of the unprocessed drug, ready to be converted into pills, allegedly in the neighboring country. The detainees confessed that everything was destined for the United States, as consumption rates for the drug as well as prices are in the highest in this country. Bolivia attends the 66th session of the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs in Austria to demand that coca growers no longer be criminalized and that the right to industrialize the natural coca leaf be respected. In Vienna, the Austrian capital, the Vice President of the plurinational state of Bolivia, David Choquehuanca, has demanded respect for the legitimate right to the traditional, nutritional, therapeutic, and ritual use of the coca leaf in this natural state. The Vice President said that the 1961 convention, in which the coca leaf was designated as a narcotic drug, prohibiting its consumption, is a historical mistake. Brazilian people commemorate councilwoman and black activist Marielle Franco 5 years after her assassination, as her relatives bet on the political change in the country for the investigators to finally get to the motive and the mastermind of the murder. The renewed interest in the investigation showed by the President Lula's government, of which Aniel Franco, Marielle's sister, is Minister of Racial Equality, brought hope that justice will finally be served, although the investigations have been stalled for years. Since the arrest of Ronnie Leza and Elcio de Quiroz as the executors in 2019, there have been no further advances regarding the motive and the mastermind behind the crime. On Monday, President Lula sent a project to Congress to mark March 14th as the Marielle Franco National Day for confronting gender and race political violence. Franco, a renowned black feminist and human rights defender, as well as Rio de Janeiro City Councilwoman, was assassinated along with her driver, Anderson Gomez, while returning from a political event of Afro women. Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva called for the protection of indigenous lands and asked his administration to speed up the process of demarcating these protected territories. Brazilian President assured on Monday that he intends to speed up this process that was stalled during the past year. In this case, Lula ensured the approval of new indigenous lands will contribute to climate protection. According to the latest census in 2010, around 800,000 indigenous people live in the South American giant, most of them in environmental reserves, covering 13.75% of the national territory. After his return to power last January, Lula mobilized environmental protection agencies in sharp contrast to his predecessor, Jair Bolsonaro, who promised he will not give an inch more to indigenous lands and under whose presidency average annual deforestation in the Amazon increased 75% over the previous decade.
I asked the Ministry and the National Indian Foundation to show me all the lands that are ready for demarcation because we need to demarcate them soon, before people get hold of them. The indigenous people are not occupying anyone's land. They are only fighting to recover what was theirs and what the invaders took from them since 1500 and have been taking away pieces of land that belong to them.
Now we move on to other topics. The Biden administration, despite climate concerns from environmental groups, approved a controversial oil drilling project on Monday on Alaska's North Slope. The Interior Department gave the green light to U.S. energy giant ConocoPhillips to drill for oil at 3 sites in the federally owned National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska's pristine Western Arctic. During the 2020 presidential race, Biden vowed not to approve any new oil and gas leases on public lands, and he has been under intense pressure by environmentalists not to approve the so-called Willow Project. However, Alaska lawmakers strongly backed the $8 billion drilling plan, defending it as a source of several thousand jobs and a contributor to U.S. energy independence over 30 years. The Trump administration approved the Willow Project at the end of the former president's term, but it was then blocked by a judge for further review. Let's take a short break, but first remember you can follow us on our TikTok account at TeleSUR English, in which you will be able to see news in different formats, news updates and more. Other stories coming up, stay with us.
El mundo se mueve constantemente y todos los días se generan nuevos sucesos. Se mueve la geopolítica mundial. Nos preguntamos qué hay detrás de cada acontecimiento, cuáles son las consecuencias y cómo nos afectan. Ante estas preguntas, buscaremos poner el punto en la I.
Welcome back to From the South. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris will travel in late March to several African countries for the first time since taking office, her press team announced on Tuesday. With this trip, Harris will become the highest-ranking official in Joe Biden's administration to visit Africa and the first Black and Asian U.S. vice president to set foot in the region. She is expected to land first in Ghana, then Tanzania, and finish in Zambia before returning to Washington, said Harris' press secretary Kirsten Allen, who added that the vice president will meet with the three presidents to discuss regional and global priorities. The White House is seeking to reposition U.S. interests in that part of the world in an attempt to counter the influence of Russia and China, countries that are expanding their footprint daily through their growing economic clout. And on Tuesday, Silicon Valley Bank, SVB Financial Group, and two top executives have been sued by the shareholders over the entity's collapse, as global stocks continue to suffer in a domino effect despite assurances from the U.S. President Joe Biden. The bank's shareholders accuse SVB Financial Group Chief Executive Greg Becker and the Chief Financial Officer Daniel Beck of concealing how rising interest rates will leave its Silicon Valley Bank unit particularly susceptible to a bank run. The proposed class action was filed on Monday in the federal court in San Jose, California, as the first of many possible lawsuits over the collapse of the bank, which U.S. regulators took over on March the 10th after a surge of deposit withdrawals. The news came as shock waves as the collapse of SVB pounded global bank stocks further on Tuesday, prompting banking stocks in Asia to plummet, with Japan's banking sub-index leading to the fall, down 6.7% in early trade to its lowest since December. And also on Monday afternoon, Pan-European Stocks Banking Index was down 5.38% after being down more than 6% following Friday's 3.8% losses and losing nearly 9% over 2 days as Germany's TeleSUR bank went down by 13%. At the start of the Eurogroup finance ministers meeting in Brussels, French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire called on markets to calm down, and the European Economic Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni stressed he did not see a risk of contagion for European banks following SVB's collapse. For his part, German Finance Minister Christian Lindner said in Brussels that his country remains untouched by the event. France's Le Maire and his Belgian counterpart Vincent van Petegem also said they saw no specific concern for the country's banks as investors were shedding their financial institutions' shares. Russian President Vladimir Putin stated on Tuesday that his country has greatly strengthened its economic sovereignty in 2022. The comments came during his visit to an aircraft factory in the city of Ulan-Ude. For his part, Russian presidential spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that due to Western sanctions, the Russian banking system is insured against the negative impact of the collapse of two U.S. banks in his way. Peskov pointed out that the events on the U.S. financial market did not affect the Russian stock market and exemplified it by showing that in the last 24 hours, Sberbank shares have increased by 1.4%, while Tinkoff registered a growth of over 2%. On the other hand, the shares of the gas company Gazprom increased by 0.7%, and those of the oil company Rosneft did so by 0.67%. On Tuesday, the Lebanese pound has sunk into a historic low against the US dollar on the country's parallel market, the latest grim milestone in the economic fallout of the Middle Eastern nation. The Lebanese pound officially fell at 15,000 to the dollar from 1,507 before the economic crisis hit in 2019, and the currency's market value was about 60,000 to the dollar in late January. Lebanese banks were closed on Tuesday as they resumed an open-ended strike against what the Association of Banks in Lebanon described as arbitrary judicial measures against lenders after depositors filed lawsuits to retrieve savings. Since last year, the country has had no president and only a caretaker government amid persistent deadlock between rival alliances in parliament. In the United Kingdom, the government's deeply controversial illegal immigration bill passed its first Commons hurdle in spite of concerns from conservative backbenchers. The new law, promoted by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, provisionally called the Illegal Migration Bill, is expected to try to make asylum claims inadmissible from those who travel to the UK on small boats. It will involve the Home Secretary to remove to Rwanda or to a third country anyone who arrives on a small boat. Those who arrive will also be prevented from claiming asylum while in the UK, with plans to also ban them from returning once removed. Meanwhile, hundreds of people gathered in Parliament Square to protest against the government's controversial new asylum and migration law, arguing it is incompatible with the European Convention on Human Rights.
Welcome those who are fleeing persecution, regardless of whether they come through a safe and legal route. By definition, someone fleeing for their life will more often than not be unable to access a legal route. I don't think it's enough to say we will meet our requirements by sending people to claim asylum in Rwanda. And this matters because of the reputation of the UK on the world stage.
TeleSUR English continues to grow. You can now tune in from 33 different African countries through StarSat. Dial 461 and enjoy our Latin American alternative broadcast. One final short break and we'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. China's visa authorities abroad will resume issuance of all categories of visas to foreigners starting on Wednesday. According to the Foreign Ministry, the decision is made to further facilitate cross-border travel. Meanwhile, foreigners with visas which were issued before March 28, 2020 and are still within their validity dates are able to enter the Asian giant directly. Likewise, visa authorities at all ports will also resume issuing visas for those who meet all the requirements. China's inbound and outbound travels were halted in early 2020 due to disruptions of the COVID-19 pandemic. As the country relaxed its pandemic travel restrictions in early December last year, international travels have released constant signs of upbeat trajectory and steady recovery. North Korea has fired 2 new ballistic missiles over the Sea of Japan in response to the joint military exercises between South Korea and the United States. According to South Korean military authorities, the short-range missiles were launched from the South Hwanghae province. For his part, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said there are no reports of any damage related to the North Korean missile launches. Pyongyang stated it has been conducting defensive missile tests in the face of continued threats against its territory by Washington and its allies in the region. A delegation of European diplomats on Tuesday visited Palestinian families facing imminent forced eviction initiated by Israeli settled groups. The evictions have placed more than 80 individuals under imminent threat of forced displacement in the East Jerusalem neighborhoods of Sheikh Jarrah, Silwan, and the Old City. Headed by U.S. representatives in Palestine, Sven Kuhn von Bergsdorf, and comprising some 25 diplomats from several European nations, the delegation visited the Palestinian families at risk of dispossession and forcible eviction, and had the opportunity to witness their suffering firsthand, calling on the Israeli occupation authorities to reverse the decisions on the intended evictions. In this sense, they reiterated the bloc's rejection of the policies implemented by the Israeli occupation authorities in Jerusalem in violation of international law. Israel's parliament took another step to push forward a legal reform package that has sparked mass protests against the hard-right government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Lawmakers vote approved in first reading a bill that would, among other things, allow the legislative body to override Supreme Court rulings with a simple majority vote and deny the court the right to review such a move. The latest measure was adopted by a 61-52 vote, but it will still need to be approved in a committee and then in second and third plenum readings before becoming law. Netanyahu's government has argued the reforms are needed to limit judicial overreach, but protesters have decried them as a threatening Israel's liberal democracy by weakening key checks and balances.
Discussing the override clause, which in essence consists of suppressing the Supreme Court as if it was the enemy of the state, the body that for years has been there for the private populations affected by the state's decisions, religious, ultra-Orthodox and secular peoples, Jews, Arabs and Druze, people of the left and right. This law is a crack way to solve a significant challenge. We stay in the bulk of laws by erasing judicial review for a specific law. We give to the majority unlimited power over the ordinary citizen who will be paying the price.
And the World Health Organization, in partnership with Africa's Center for Disease Control and Prevention, has mapped out 6 countries for vaccine manufacture. According to the largest health development non-governmental international organization based in Africa, AMREF Health, the countries identified include Rwanda, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, and Algeria. Authorities also said that the establishment of manufacturing plants will also guarantee a fight against future pandemics. On her part, Mashidiso Moeti, WHO Regional Director for Africa, said countries should revamp investment in health, adding that this is a key determinant of socio-economic development for the continent. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.